Thunder roared in the distance as evening descended upon Agbodo. In the hours before the confrontation, the village had been preparing for the annual harvest festival. Children had woven palm fronds into decorative patterns, and the aroma of jollof rice and spiced meats had filled the air. No one could have predicted how drastically their celebrations would be interrupted. The evening air now hung heavy, charged with the weight of secrets long buried and the echoes of choices that could not be undone. The square, once a place of celebration, now brimmed with unease. Faces that had smiled only moments before now looked toward the old woman who had stepped from the shadows. Her voice still reverberated through the stunned silence. "I am your mother." Amina stood frozen, her body stiff and trembling under the unbearable weight of the revelation. Her wide eyes, pools of disbelief, locked onto the woman before her, frail yet unyielding, with features that carried an uncanny resemblance to her own. The woman's face bore the marks of decades of suffering, each wrinkle a testament to the battles she had fought in silence. Whispers rippled through the crowd, doubt and curiosity weaving through the gathered villagers. Some of the older residents exchanged knowing glances, as if pieces of a long-forgotten puzzle were finally falling into place. They remembered the night, 25 years ago, when screams had echoed through the village and Amina's mother had vanished without a trace. Ao, standing just behind his mother, clenched his fists, his face a mix of confusion and anger. His gaze darted between Amina and the stranger, searching for an anchor in the chaos. The darkness that had been growing within him since Baba's death stirred, feeding on his uncertainty. "Lies," Ao spat, his voice low but dangerous. "This is some trick." His fingers trembled, and beneath his skin, shadows writhed like living things. The woman did not flinch. Her eyes, sharp and filled with untold pain, remained fixed on Amina. She stepped forward, leaning heavily on an old carved staff, a staff that Amina recognized with a jolt. It had belonged to her father's mother, passed down through generations of healers. "You know it's true, Amina. Look at me. Look at what he did to protect his secrets." The woman pulled back her sleeve, revealing intricate ritual scars that spiraled up her arm. Amina gasped, her hand flying to her own arm where identical marks lay hidden beneath her clothes, marks she had always believed were birthmarks. Amina's knees threatened to buckle. Memories she'd buried clawed their way to the surface, whispers from her childhood, the shadows of a mother lost to time. The scent of burning herbs, a lullaby half remembered, the warmth of arms that had held her close. "My mother is dead," she whispered, though even as she spoke the words, doubt began to seep in. "Baba told me." Baba lied, the woman cut in sharply, her tone resolute. "Your father, he did this to me. He bound me to his darkness, trapped me in the space between worlds, and told you I was gone. But I've been watching, waiting, hoping for this moment." She reached into her tattered robes and withdrew a small, one-leather pouch. "Do you remember this, Amina? The protection charm you made when you were 7. I've kept it all these years, even in the darkness." Amina staggered back, the memory hitting her like a physical blow. She had made that charm the day before her mother disappeared, weaving dried flowers and sacred herbs into the leather with childish determination. The villagers murmured louder now, the energy of the crowd shifting into something raw and uncertain. Emeka stepped forward, his authoritative presence breaking through the tension. But before he could speak, another voice rang out clear and unexpected. "It's true." The crowd parted as Mama Zainab, the village's oldest resident, made her way forward. Her ancient face was lined with grief and guilt. "I was there the night it happened. Your father, he performed the ritual unlike anything I had ever seen. Your mother had discovered something about the source of his power." Ayo's expression shifted, a flicker of fear crossing his face. "What do you mean? What source?" Mama Zainab's eyes filled with tears. "The darkness that flows through your veins, child. It didn't begin with Baba. He made a pact generations ago, in his first life, with something ancient and terrible. Each time he died, he would be reborn into his own bloodline, carrying the darkness with him." The revelation sent shockwaves through the gathered crowd. Amina felt the world tilt beneath her feet as pieces began falling into place. Her father's unnaturally long life, the stories of his father before him who had looked exactly the same, the way the darkness seemed to recognize her son. "You're lying," Ao snapped again, though his voice quivered slightly. "My grandmother died because of Boba's rituals." "And what of yours, Ao?" the woman said suddenly, her voice slicing through him. "The vortex. The cockroaches. Do you think the darkness only touched you? Boba's curse runs deeper than you know. It has poisoned this family for generations. But it can end." She turned to Amina, her eyes pleading. "Your father trapped me because I discovered the truth. Each generation, he would choose a vessel, a child of his blood, to inherit his spirit when his current body failed. But the vessel had to be prepared, marked with darkness from birth. When I discovered what he planned to do to you, I tried to stop him. That's when he bound me." Ao faltered, his breath catching. The cockroaches that had plagued his dreams began to make horrible sense. They weren't just symbols of corruption, they were memories. Memories of past vessels, of bodies used and discarded across centuries. "But something went wrong this time," the woman continued, her voice growing stronger. "When you grew up, Amina, you proved too pure, too resistant to the darkness. So he had to wait for the next generation." For Ao. Amina's word spun as she looked at her son with new eyes. The darkness that had been growing in him since Boba's death wasn't just inheritance, it was possession. Her father wasn't trying to pass on his power, he was trying to take over Ao's body. "You're wrong," Ao whispered, but his voice cracked. Shadows began to seep from his skin, and his eyes flickered between their natural brown and an otherworldly black. "Boba chose me because I was strong. He chose you because you were vulnerable," Akin spoke up suddenly, stepping forward. The young man's usually gentle face was set with determination. "Think about it, Ao. Why did he isolate you? Why did he turn you against your mother? He was grooming you, weakening your defenses so he could take control." The ground trembled beneath their feet, a low rumble that seemed to rise from the depths of the earth itself. The villagers gasped, stepping back in fear as the air grew thick with malevolent energy. From the edge of the square, a deep, hollow laugh rang out, a sound that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. The temperature plummeted, and shadows began to ride across the ground like living things. Ao whipped around, his heart pounding in his chest. His eyes darted wildly as the voice grew louder, its mocking tone unmistakable. "Did you think I would leave so easily?" The words triggered a memory in Amina's mother, a fragment of the past she had tried desperately to forget. She remembered the night she discovered Boba's true nature, how she had found the ancient scrolls hidden beneath the floorboards of their home. The text spoke of a ritual performed centuries ago, when the first of their bloodline made a pact with entities that existed before time itself. She remembered reading the names that made her tongue bleed and her mind recoil. Boba wasn't just seeking immortality, he was a conduit for something far worse. The possession of his descendants wasn't merely about survival, it was about preparing vessels for these ancient beings' return. As this realization crashed over her, she gripped her staff tighter. The marking on her arms began to burn with renewed intensity. She had spent 25 years trapped in the space between worlds, learning secrets that no mortal was meant to know. Perhaps that had been Boba's greatest mistake, giving her time to understand the true scope of his plans. "Did you think I would leave so easily?" A cold wind tore through the square, carrying whispers in languages long dead. Amina staggered, clutching her chest as her mother stood tall, raising her staff in defiance. "No," she breathed, her voice breaking. "He's still here." The villagers screamed as the center of the square erupted in a burst of dark smoke, tendrils riding like serpents as they slithered across the ground. But this time, something was different. As Boba's spectral form emerged, flickering between solid and shadow, another figure appeared beside him, a woman, her face a mirror of Amina's mother, but twisted with malice. "Sister," the new arrival purred, her voice like silk over steel. "Did you think you were the only one he bound?" Amina's mother staggered back, horror etched across her face. "Adana. But you died before I was even born." The spectral woman laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Death is such a flexible concept in our family, dear sister. Father made sure of that. And now, it's time for the next generation to learn our ways." The ground split open, revealing a swirling vortex of darkness beneath. Cockroaches poured forth in impossible numbers, their chitinous bodies gleaming with an unholy light. But instead of scattering, they began to form shapes, human shapes, dozens of them, each one a previous vessel that Boba had inhabited and discarded. "Behold your legacy, Ao," Boba's voice hissed, a ghastly smile on his face. "This family belongs to me. Generation after generation, vessel after vessel. And you, my boy, are the perfect host." The spectral figures began to dance, a macabre celebration of death and rebirth. Each one bore Boba's face at different ages, different times, but all wore the same cruel smile. "You see now, don't you?" Adana called out, her form shifting between woman and shadow. "Why resist what's inevitable? Join us, Ao. Embrace the darkness that's already inside you." Ao stood transfixed, the darkness swirling around him like chains. His face contorted with pain as two forces battled within him, the darkness that promised power and the light that begged for freedom. Amina's voice cut through the chaos, thick with tears but strong with determination. "Ao, listen to me. You are not him. You are my son, my light, my hope. Fight him." But Boba's laugh only grew louder, the smoke coiling tighter around Ao. "Your love cannot save him, Amina. Just as it couldn't save your mother. The darkness always wins." Amina's mother stepped forward, her staff glowing with a faint light. "Not always," she said firmly. "There's something you never understood, husband. Something more powerful than your darkness." She began to chant, words that seemed to pierce the very fabric of reality. The staff in her hands blazed brighter, and the air filled with the scent of lightning. "The ritual that bound me," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "It had a flaw. Love cannot be corrupted. And I loved my daughter enough to wait decades for this moment." She raised the staff high, and suddenly the air was filled with voices, hundreds of them, crying out in pain and rage. The spirits of all those Boba had possessed, all those he had destroyed in his quest for immortality. "Now, Amina," her mother shouted. "The truth, I discovered the way to end this. It was always in your blood. Your power isn't darkness, it's light." Amina stepped forward, her hands beginning to glow with a pure, white light. The marks on her arm, the ones she had thought were ritual scars, began to shine like stars. "No!" Boba roared, his form becoming more solid as he lunged toward Ao. "He is mine." Ao's eyes met his mother's, then Akin's, then his grandmother's. A single tear slipped down his face as the darkness pressed in around him. I can't," he whispered. The tendrils of darkness surged upward, consuming Ao in a wave of smoke. Amina screamed, lunging forward as the villagers cried out in horror. But as the smoke cleared, something unexpected happened. Where Ao had stood, there was now a pillar of light. Inside it, Ao floated, his eyes closed, his body suspended between darkness and light. And then he opened his eyes. They were not black with darkness or even his natural brown. They blazed with a golden light that seemed to pierce through centuries of shadows. "I remember," he said, his voice echoing with power. "I remember all of them, all the vessels, all the lives you stole. And I reject you." The light exploded outward, shattering the darkness like glass. Boba's spectral form screamed, his carefully constructed immortality cracking at its foundations. The cockroaches burst into flame, the spirits of his past vessels finally breaking free of his control. Adana's form began to dissolve, but she was laughing. "You think this is the end? Darkness always finds a way, nephew. Always." With a final surge of power, she vanished into the vortex, dragging several of the former vessels with her. The ground sealed itself, leaving only a small, dark mark on the earth. The villagers stood in stunned silence, their faces pale and tear-streaked. Ao descended slowly to the ground, the golden light fading from his eyes but not disappearing completely. Amina rushed forward, gathering her son in her arms. Her mother joined them, placing a trembling hand on Ao's shoulder. "The darkness is gone from you," she said softly, "but Adana's escape means this isn't over. There are more secrets, more battles to come. Emeka stepped forward, his face set with grim determination. Then we will face them together. Agbodo protects its own. Above them, the sky began to clear, stars peeking through the dissipating clouds. But on the horizon, lightning still flickered, promising storms to come. Akin moved to stand beside Eo, their hands finding each other in the darkness. Whatever comes next, he said quietly, you won't face it alone. Eo nodded, his free hand reaching for his mother's. We are stronger than his darkness, he said firmly. We always were. We just had to remember. As the village began to settle, Amina's mother looked toward the horizon, her expression troubled. The battle for Eo's soul is won, she murmured, but Adana's escape opens doors better left closed. The darkness will try to find a new vessel. Amina squeezed her son's hand, her voice steady despite her tears. Then we'll be ready. All of us. Village square bathed in moonlight. Amina knew this was only the beginning. Generations of darkness couldn't be undone in a single night, no matter how momentous. As she held her son close, she could feel the weight of destiny settling around them like a cloak. In the shadows of a nearby building, a figure watched the scene unfold. Their eyes gleamed with an otherworldly light, and a smile played across their lips. They had waited centuries for this moment, for the perfect confluence of power and opportunity. Bobo's defeat wasn't an end, it was merely the first move in a much larger game. The figure melted into the darkness, leaving behind only the faintest whisper, soon. Days later, as Eo slept fitfully in his bed, strange symbols began appearing on his skin, ancient writings in a language long forgotten. And in his dreams, he had a voice that was neither Bobo's nor Adana's, but something far older and more terrible. The true battle was only beginning. 3 weeks after the confrontation in the square, Eo sat cross-legged in his grandmother's newly established healing hut at the edge of the village. The morning sun filtered through the thatched roof, casting dappled shadows on the dried herbs and sacred objects that hung from the rafters. His grandmother, he was still getting used to calling her that, moved about the space with practiced grace, despite her years of imprisonment. The symbols, she said, examining the strange markings that had appeared on his skin, they are not just writing. They are keys. Her weathered fingers traced the intricate patterns that spiraled down his forearm. Each one represents a doorway that Bobo opened during his centuries of existence. Eo suppressed a shiver. Doorways to what? To the spaces between worlds. She reached for a leather-bound book, its pages yellow with age. During my imprisonment, I wasn't simply trapped in darkness. I was forced to witness terrible things. Bobo's experiments, his communications with entities that should never have been contacted. She opened the book, revealing pages of diagrams and notes written in multiple hands across different eras. This is your heritage, Eo. Not the darkness itself, but the responsibility to guard against it. Our bloodline wasn't cursed by accident. We were chosen. By who? Eo asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Before she could respond, a commotion outside drew their attention. Akin burst through the door, his usually calm demeanor shattered by urgency. The old temple, he gasped. You need to come. Now. At the outskirts of Agbodo, past the newer buildings and carefully tended farms, stood the ruins of what had once been a grand temple. Most villagers avoided the place, claiming it was haunted. Now, as Eo approached with his grandmother and Akin, he understood why. The ground around the temple writhed with cockroaches, but these were different from before. Their shells were translucent, revealing pulsing organs that glowed with an inner light. They moved in perfect synchronization, forming complex patterns across the crumbling stones. It's a message, his grandmother whispered, her face pale. From Adana. The cockroaches shifted, arranging themselves into words. The seals are breaking. The first gate opens at moonrise. Did you think your victory came without cost? Amina appeared beside them, slightly out of breath from running. I felt it, she said. A disturbance in the village's protective wards. She looked at her mother. What did you teach me about the gates when I was young? I keep having fragments of memories. I tried to warn you, before Baba took me, her mother replied. There are 5 ancient gates scattered around Agbodo. They were built by our ancestors to contain something that Baba promised would give him true immortality, not just the ability to possess his descendants. Ayo stepped closer to the temple entrance, drawn by a strange humming that seemed to emanate from deep within. The markings on his skin began to glow faintly. The gates, his grandmother continued, they are connected to our bloodline. Each generation was supposed to have a guardian, someone pure of heart who could maintain the seals. But Baba corrupted that tradition, using the power for himself instead of containing it. And now? Akin asked, taking Ayo's hand. Now the gates are failing. When Ayo rejected Baba's possession, it created a power vacuum. The entities behind the gates, they are reaching for him. Through the marks on his skin, they are trying to make him their key. The cockroaches suddenly scattered, disappearing into cracks and shadows. In their wake, they left behind a perfect circle of ash. At its center lay a single object, a small, bronze key that seemed to absorb the sunlight around it. Amina moved to pick it up, but her mother caught her wrist. No, she warned. This is Adana's trap. She's trying to force our hand, make us choose between letting the gates fail naturally or opening them ourselves to face what's behind them. Ayo looked at the key, then at the temple ruins. There's something else, he said quietly. Something you haven't told us about Adana. About why she helped Baba. His grandmother's expression grew haunted. Your great-aunt, she wasn't always as you saw her. She was like you once, chosen to be a guardian. But the entities behind the gates, they showed her things. Terrible, wonderful things. They offered her power beyond imagination, and she took it. That's why Baba bound me when I discovered the truth. He knew I would try to stop them both. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of decay. In the distance, storm clouds gathered despite the earlier clear sky. The very air seemed to pause with anticipation. We don't have much time, Amina said, looking at her son. The marks on your skin, they are spreading. By moonrise. By moonrise, I need to make a choice, Ayo finished. He squeezed Akin's hand, drawing strength from the contact. But I won't make it alone. His grandmother nodded gravely. No, you won't. But remember, the power to open the gates is also the power to seal them forever. The question is, are you ready to learn what that will cost? Thunder roared in the distance as the first drops of rain began to fall. The bronze key gleamed despite the darkness, a silent challenge to all who stood before it. And deep beneath the temple, something ancient stirred, awakening from centuries of slumber. The true battle was indeed only beginning, but this time, the stakes were higher than any of them had imagined. The mark where the vortex had been seems to pulse faintly, a reminder that some shadows refuse to fade completely. In the distance, a cockroach skitters across the ground, its shell gleaming with an unnatural light. As it disappears into the darkness, a whisper carries on the wind, a promise, or perhaps a warning. The night is not over yet.